This is going to be a video to do with tone and maybe answering some questions I occasionally get asked to do with equipment and things like that. Obviously tones is probably one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, because it's no good playing, a lot of stuff even if it's ought to sound good, if the sound coming out is not good, then it's pointless. So yeah, I guess one of a question I occasionally get asked is what strings do I use? These are just Ernie Ball Super Slinky 9 to 42, just the regular pink packet ones. I used to use, I've used anything between 11s and 9s, the Ernie Ball ones. They're all good, they're all fine. I mainly started using the thinner ones just because mainly so my nails don't wear out so fast, because they have a little bit less tension, so you don't wear your nails out as quick. But they're quite nice because you can do a bit of this sort of subtle kind of sideways vibrato to get a nice kind of sound that way. Of course you've got the neck vibrato as well, but I like this. Feels quite sort of intuitive, because you're just touching the strings and moving them. I guess, yeah, that's kind of like if you hear an Alan Holdsworth lead line, that's how he does his vibratos and things. It just has a kind of different effect, really. So yeah, that's a quick note on strings. I mean, it's sort of standard tuning most of the time, occasionally E flat, but sometimes E flat can sound a bit muddy for certain kinds of chords, if they have like a cluster in or something. At least that's a general thing. If you, in higher register, you can play things closer together and it sounds less jarring, versus if you did some really kind of, this is a lot more than, anyway, so you can get away with closer things in higher register really without it sounding muddy. But yeah, so another thing occasionally get asked about is amp stuff. This is a Fender Deluxe Reverb, stock Jensen speaker. Tone settings, trebles 5, bass 5, reverb just under about 3. Right now I've got the tremolo off, sometimes I have a little bit. I think the volume makes quite a big difference. You want the sound I personally like, if the volume's not loud enough, it sounds a bit too acoustic and you get that hollow body sound, which is not a bad sound, but it's just not what I want. I like the compression you get from turning up a little bit louder, so I usually have the volume between about 4 and 5. I think that's a big part of the sound. And then sometimes use a Princeton reverb stock again, pretty much the same settings really, but I think it changes the sound depending on the volume. So if you want like more of an acoustic sound, then don't push the amp so much. But if you want a bit more compression, a bit more of almost like a synth, is that, I don't know, almost like a I like the vibraphone sound, where it just kind of rings quite smoothly. I feel like you can get that a bit more if you just push the amp ever so slightly more. So yeah, I guess a quick note on pickups. These are just stock Tele pickups. I'm pretty much always using the neck pickup for this kind of playing, or almost everything I do, to be honest. But I do have the bass side lower than the treble side. This side of the pickup is definitely lower than that. I think overall it's fairly low in general, because I find if it's too close to the strings, you lose a bit of that sweetness of the sound. It just starts to sound a bit brittle or something. when I do it lower on the bass side, so it's a bit more balanced for if you're playing things where there's like a chord or something on the bottom. So the melody isn't drowned out, basically. If I played that same kind of thing and was not aware of the pick, maybe I had the bass side too high or something, you wouldn't hear the melody as much. It would just feel like the bass is overpowering things a little bit. So that's kind of something to be aware of, I suppose. And on the guitar settings are pretty much, like I say, everything's pretty neutral on the amp. Treble 5, bass 5, but the tone control's on like 1 on the guitar, it's way down. I find that helps get rid of any weird sounds like this. Weirdly, I find doing it on the guitar, I think somehow having the treble up on the amp excites some frequencies that makes harmonics and things like come out a bit clearer. Versus if I had the treble up on here and turned it down on the amp, it seems to work ever so slightly better like this way around. Yeah, so a really important thing is actually the state of your nails, to be honest. If you like this kind of sound, if you just want that really clean sound, I have the nails probably, I guess some point of reference would just be a little bit longer than they would be if it was playing an acoustic, like a classical guitar or something like that. Just because on an electric, I find this sound, you ought to touch the strings even lighter. You know, it's so light. That's really how I'm playing. You know, when I turn the volume down, you obviously can't hear it acoustically. And having them really smooth is really important. Otherwise, you just get really horrible scratching sounds. But basically, having them a little bit longer, you get to avoid that kind of popping sound, which is not a bad sound, but it's not personally what I want for this, because it lets you touch them a bit lighter. And if you have the edges nice and smooth, like if you get a nail file with a high grade and just finish them on the edges, it just makes a big difference to the sound. And just gives you like a nice clean tone that kind of rings out with a nice glassy effect. Yeah, so another kind of thing that's fairly interesting about the guitar is playing the same chord in different string sets makes a huge difference to the sound. For example, if I was to play an E minor 7 like that, that sounds really different to this. They just ring differently, so it's definitely worth exploring how these things sort of fit together. Because it makes a big difference. So when you're playing, just try the same things in different spots. You don't need to know how to play the same thing in a million different ways, you just need to know the best one. So that's definitely worth exploring, to do with tone. So yeah, I guess a bit to do with, obviously this is a solid body guitar. I like that sound. It's a bit more compressed than it's more what I'm after than a hollow body. When I say compressed, it basically just means there's less dynamic range, so it rings longer. You get the difference between loud and quiet is less, so you lose that, but the notes ring longer. You definitely want some reverb on the amp though if you're playing this, otherwise it just sounds dead. Whereas a hollow body or something like that has a bit of natural reverb on its own. But I think that's a big part of this particular sound, is this is quite a heavy sort of guitar. I think that just makes things ring a bit longer. It just makes things ring a little bit differently. So I guess I'll talk just briefly about something else, which is a guitar pick. I'll just grab this one here. Because I'm playing so softly with the nails, if I switch to playing with a pick, I have to turn the volume to about half. When I play with a pick, it just comes out so much louder. I don't really change a whole lot apart from that. And you can do different things obviously with a pick. I do like to those sorts of percussive sounds. You know, obviously you're never going to be able to get that with the fingernails. So, but that just means turning the volume down. And if you're playing with a bass and drums, then you're going to need to raise the treble. But that's pretty much the only difference. I don't really change anything on the amps for that kind of thing. That seems to work okay. So, yeah, I guess that kind of is a few topics. But do let me know if you have any questions.